I know it's fun to actually be with human beings and to say hello. It's been a long time, it seems like, since we've been able to meet together, especially larger groups. So it's great to see everybody, and hope everyone's staying safe. And we're really happy to be here. We're especially happy to have this presentation. It got delayed, and it's been quite a process leading up to this point, but we're really happy to work with Utah State University and our friends up in the Landscape Architecture Environmental Planning program, and we're really happy to have you down here for this presentation. So, I don't know, do we want to applaud? So again, we're happy to hear this presentation for the Capstone, and this all started in 2019, and it was quite an involved process. Like I said, it involved several trips to Logan. I was trying to remember how many times I went. I know in 1 week I went 3 times, but I was in Salt Lake. And then several of us journeyed up throughout the course of last semester, but especially this semester. We made several trips for the planning charrette, and we were really impressed with the enthusiasm and the expertise that the professors and the students brought. And it was so fun to have all these eyeballs, all these students talking about Kanab. And I remember the one day that we did the planning charrette, I was there all day long, no bathroom breaks, and just getting pulled in lots of different directions with people looking for answers. And it was also an interesting exercise in what people learn about Kanab because of the internet and nothing else. And so that was something that I think we need to think about, our perception out in the world. And we're going to hear lots of ideas today, some really good stuff. And there's been over 5,000 hours of research, planning, and creation of concepts. And there's been over 100 students, from freshmen to graduate students, that collaborated in 11-person teams, 11-person teams covering 12 principal areas of study, which you're going to go through in depth, I'm guessing. So we need to recognize a few people. Glad to see Camille here with the Kane County Office of Tourism, who helped provide funding for this study. And in addition to Kanab City, and we got Joe and members of the City Council. Michael, thanks for being here. I think we have several others, and the mayor, and we appreciate Commissioner Chamberlain being here as well, and for Kane County's support for this project. The Economic Development Corporation of Utah contributed some money to this, and the Governor's Office of Economic Development also contributed, in addition to the Center for Education, Business, and the Arts. We really appreciate the Kanab Center staff, and John Jacobs, and Danielle, and Erica. Thanks for everything. And Celeste, of course, from the City Council as well. Thank you for being here. And recognize our other elected officials. We have Kevin Blomquist, thanks for being here. Jeff Stock from the county, thank you. Let's see, we already embarrassed Joe. Who else? We really appreciate everyone that made the trek up to Logan. And I know Dirk came with us once, and Jeff Yates, and Bob Kazauka, and Yulia, of course, up front here, was very involved and made the trek up to Logan. And who else? Matt. And of course we can't forget Matt, who's been a key figure of all this, that has contributed a lot and spent a lot of time. We really, really appreciate Matt. Who else? Do we get everybody? We have Kelly Brown with the Water Conservancy District is here. Thanks, Kelly. And Mike Noel couldn't be here today, but we're going to talk a lot about the water, Jackson Flat Reservoir and the Water Conservancy District. And last but not least, we want to introduce our professors and our guests here. And we have Todd, Jake, and Carlos. And thanks for making the trek down from one end of the state to the next, and we really appreciate it. Jake is a longtime friend of Kane County and has contributed a lot to our knowledge and research and especially to projects. And you can go around town and see projects that we've worked a lot of years on. And we have Carlos. You know, he's so smart that Jeopardy watches him. So thank you. And of course, Jake is so sharp that he can't be around any balloons. So watch out for that. And are we turning it over to you, Todd? So I know you're so bright that moths fly around your head. I've seen it. So.
When I'm fishing only.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So we really appreciate all your help and expertise and for being here with us today. Thank you. I didn't spit on you.
Oops. I was just going to hold this, but I've got the pointer too. So can you all hear me? Thank you everybody for having us down. We were down in 2017 as well, and we were sponsored by Best Friends, and we looked at issues in and around the downtown, but focused on a lot of Best Friends kind of issues, and that yielded the Roadhouse project and the renovation of the motel. And the students came up with a lot of creative ideas about that at that time. So when we were re-engaged by Matt and Kelly and Joe and other members of the city administration to come back again and really focus on Kanab issues, we were so happy to have the opportunity to come to what we think is one of the most beautiful and underappreciated communities in the whole state. And I could say that a little bit because I grew up in a small town, and my brother became a landscape architect and taught at Utah State, and so he was a mentor of mine. He's about 10 years older than I am, and he actually participated on this by helping a wildlife study and really getting involved with Kelly on the reservoir thinking. And so when I was young, my brother came home from school. He was learning about planning and landscape architecture. And he said that there were some things happening in the downtown. My dad was a businessman. He had a little dry cleaning business in downtown Wilmer, Minnesota. And he used to get together with his friends and have breakfast almost every day in the mornings downtown. Kind of like ranchers and farmers do. They get together and they grumble about stuff. And occasionally I would get invited to go along, and I would hear about the problems of parking and traffic, and there was a state highway that was running through my town, and when it was opening day of fishing, it was almost impossible for anybody to move through that town because the cars with the boats were lined up wanting to get to the lakes for the opening walleye fishing. And they grumbled about stuff and they didn't do much about it, and all of a sudden somebody bought a big piece of land at the edge of town. And that really perfect town of 7,000 or 8,000 people in 1965 was kind of turned inside out, and everybody in the businesses started leaving downtown. And the edges got developed, but all that relationship, that walkable connection between the churches and the downtown and Main Street, and there was kind of a sin street where there were a couple of 3-2 beer joint bars and a couple pool halls, and then there was Main Street where all the fancy stuff was, and the churches dotted in and around, and all of a sudden the energy of that place went away, and the place that we knew. And my brother was studying it a little bit, and he was pointing some things out. And so when I got to be the age of an interest in a career, he said, well, what about landscape architecture and planning? So I came to Utah State after floundering a couple years in a state university in Minnesota, and I really kind of found a calling, and graduated from Utah State, went up to Alberta and worked on some communities up there and planning and landscape architecture, then got a graduate degree, and came back to the Intermountain West because I really believe that's an incredibly beautiful place. And it, without some foresight and planning and help, I thought we could be of assistance. So started to practice there and worked for about 4 years, and then went back to Utah State met up with my colleagues, Carlos Licon, who has extensive experience and background in regional planning, and Jake Powell has been doing outreach and trail building and community rebuilding projects with young people for the last 10 or 15 years, having graduated from Utah State and gone to Penn State to get an advanced degree. So we all got the chance to reconverge here again in the fall and see this amazingly beautiful place, delicate place. And so the students, my sophomores, I teach the students at the beginning of their academic career and then at the end. So the capstone is the seniors. They finish the work that you see in the document and that you'll see today. But the whole process has started of gathering information and visiting with local people started with the sophomores, and that was in the fall. And then we had some public outreach and engagement, so the seniors started in January, and then you guys came to Logan at about the last week in January, a number of you, and so we had probably the best public involvement that we've ever had, thanks to just how networked you guys are as a group. And the only way that a capstone really works well is when the students get engaged with the community. And unfortunately, as we all know, after February and into March, we confronted this problem where we couldn't be together. So we had to, and we only had one case of a student contacting it, the COVID-19 over the break. And so we were fortunate to continue to sustain the student interest through virtual. So we had Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, and some of those Zoom meetings we had with you all. And so the history of this is the sophomores coming here, the seniors starting January 1st to absorb the information, having a kickoff, having you come, spending an entire week. So as Kelly said, there were 120 people working on Kanab for a solid week. And then we divided into 5 teams, and the students worked through the COVID process to develop about a 150-page document of the efforts of the 5 teams, and then about a 45-minute PowerPoint that the 3 of us are going to give. So what happens is students need to discover things a little bit on their own, and they also need to discover things as a result of talking to townspeople. So the combination of those 2 things yielded projects that focused on Kanab Creek. And Kanab Creek was obviously diverted, and so water was sent to for the creation of a recreation opportunity here. So these are 2 recreation opportunities that they wanted to pursue. And then there were a group of students that said, one of the things we found out from townspeople is that when their families or their kids grow up, that there's that kind of 25 to 45-year-old segment of the population that needs to be brought back to Kanab in order to start businesses and flourish that sort of family building demographic side of it. And a really important aspect of accomplishing that is housing and affordable housing. So we actually looked at housing in 3 locations in the core area. You can see Highway 89 here in the split. So we are right here at this point. So we looked at housing in the core, housing in the southwest quadrant, and housing kind of connected and related to the southeastern quadrant and that flatter prairie land out there. We looked at the issues of the core downtown area, and we looked at the issues of the entrance to the city from the east and the Pugh Canyon, what we call the Coral Cliffs. So all in all, we have 5 teams focused on 5 specific areas of interest. And Jake's going to take you through the first team. Getting a little feedback here. My problem. There's that. Forward, backward. You good?
Is that better?
As Todd said, it's a pleasure to be here. One of the things that's exciting about working with students and what I've always enjoyed is that there's tremendous potential, unlimited potential in a student. And what's exciting about Kanab is there's really unlimited potential here, and that's what our students really discovered. And one thing that's exciting as well about working with students is they're the people that are going to inhabit these places in the future. So seeing your city through their eyes is an interesting way to see a little glimpse of the future. So when we talk about these ideas, they are ideas and they're a vision. And so some of these ideas and vision will resonate with you. You'll find connection to them. Some of these things may be overly progressive and perhaps scary at some points, but they do provide a vision of Kanab through the eyes of the next generation, which I think is exciting. And I want to start with kind of some of the things that the students discovered. So as you know, when God created the earth, he was extra kind to Kanab. You are in a location that's pretty spectacular. You're on the doorstep and become the welcome mat to some of the most iconic places in the United States. The national parks, the places, the state parks, the public lands that surround this area are world-renowned. That creates a series of opportunities, but it also creates a series of challenges that you all grapple with probably on a daily basis. When it comes to geography, Kanab is interesting. One reason these parks exist is it is the union of a bunch of different large ecosystems or ecotones. You have areas up to the north that are wildly different to the south, and the east and the west are wildly different. And they all converge in and around Kanab. And if you look at the history of Kanab, a lot of the reason that people have inhabited this area for a really long time was this convergence of interesting and different ecosystems. So it is special ecologically. When you talk about landforms, the students started to call this landform the Big Hug. These cliffs that surround Kanab are like a big hug. Maybe you feel that as residents, but it's something that students almost perceived instantaneously, that the location, the physical location of Kanab makes it feel like it's got a degree of safety and it's welcoming. It's both safe in that it's tucked into the hills, but it's also expansive in the fact that it looks out across the Arizona Strip, which is a really interesting juxtaposition that most communities don't have. That was gifted to you by the people that set the original flag to establish this town. So we felt like we had a lot to work with, and the students had a lot to work with, both in challenges as well as opportunities. And as Todd mentioned, the real governing idea behind all their work is what we called the necklace. It became known as the necklace. It was how do we connect all the amazing attributes and work that you've done already, connected and unified in some sort of system. And that became the necklace. So we'll refer to the necklace quite a bit, but I'm going to start there. So the main spine of the necklace was Kanab Creek. If most of you know what Kanab Creek is, many of you probably drive through it on your way back and forth from the ranchos perhaps, but it is an ecological asset that's pretty unique. There's not a lot of water in this country. There's very few perennial water sources between Lake Powell and the Virgin River, and Kanab Creek is one of those. So it's a pretty unique asset that may have been forgotten to some degree by the community in that it has changed significantly over time. So I'll talk about that first, this green area. Here is Kanab Creek in this diagram. So if you look at Kanab Creek now, it's changed. It's a lot different than it would have been when John Wesley Powell perhaps walked up it 100 plus years ago. So there is a lot of ecology happening in the river, and the students came to realize or understand that there was a lot of opportunity to bring that ecology back, but bring it back in a natural way, but also highlight the ecology and the river for the residents. So the first thing they did, they looked at the landforms of the river. They tried to figure out, was there a place that was both safe and advantageous to put something? So they looked at cliffs, they looked at steep slopes, and they tried to avoid those areas and nestle these parks, kind of like the community into a safe place with a lot of prospect outward. So they set three proposed areas or highlighted three areas where parks could be that would become sort of the jewels or some of the jewels on this necklace. So I'll talk about their ideas for these parks. The first one is Willow Park, which would be connected to downtown. The next is what they called Oxbow Park, which was part of an old oxbow and old abandoned river channel. And then last one was one near the school. And these each have a different flair and a different style to them. And the imagery that the students provided for visual, to create some compelling visuals, is documented well in the book. I won't cover all the visuals that they produced. We'll start with Willow Park. Willow Park was about connecting the community back to the river, so it's the northernmost park on the chain. This was an idea for what it could look like. The second park they called Oxbow Park. Again, it is looking at using the existing ecology to celebrate the movement of the river. So it's both a restoration park in bringing the ecology of the river back. It is also a place where flood control can happen, but also a place where people can recreate. So what it might look like if you were to be in Oxbow Park. The last one they called School Park because it is adjacent to the high school and the middle school. And it was about education. It was about providing an opportunity for the community to learn about the river, to reconnect with that asset that is sort of hidden in a world of Russian olive and tamarisk to some degree. So strung together, they would look something like this. It's kind of a different vision for Kanab Creek and letting that become a central spine, an exciting place for people to go recreate, enjoy, and learn about this perennial water source that's unique in this general area. So in all, the students proposed in this one spine about almost 3 miles of new trail, about 60 acres of restored area, 40 acres of new park, and as the students coined it, unlimited potential for memories.
Jake, you're really good. That was nice. Really good. This is kind of what I was speaking to in terms of my kid growing up and looking at downtown. And the students immediately gravitated toward a charming downtown with interesting stuff, but some challenges in terms of the speed of how traffic moves through the downtown and the impact on pedestrians and the noise level on Main Street, and some of the things that we've been trying to cram into their consciousness as teachers of those students. What makes successful downtowns, I think Roger Brooks was here a number of years ago and talks about, Roger goes all around the country to places that I used to then consult or redesign main streets for, and he talks about what makes successful downtowns. And it's really the integration or the place at which there's a crossroads of people. But when you have a town that's full of visitors and tourists, sometimes the crossroads of those people, you encounter conflict. And the conflict has to do when you're running, 15, 20, 30,000 cars through a day, and you're also wanting to have a sidewalk cafe experience at the bakery on the corner of Rock and Bee. And last night, sitting there and trying to have a peaceful dinner and having traffic roll by at 10, 15 miles an hour faster than is really comfortable for someone to walk and eat there. Downtowns are successful. They're a networking place. They're a place where locals engage one another. Witness the Kanab Center that we're in right here, and what an amazing facility that is. And you'll see further on how the students showed a way in which that downtown could come to more of a restful centerpiece and better integrate the investments that you've made in your downtown, like the Kanab Center. So one of the challenges here is that road that's also the lifeblood of the place. We identified a North Core area that has a little bit more to do with civic and government organizations, the school, the Kanab Center, the refurbished park and the pump track, and the great recreation facilities that are a little bit more civic oriented, and the South Core being a little bit more the historic part where there have been restoration of existing and old homes. And so it started to create a set of relationships here between the fate of the school, whether it stays as a school. I think there's strong support for that idea, and we were encouraged by that, and so we looked at some of the sites around it, if it stays as a school, how it relates to Main Street, the opportunity of this big sweeping curve, and the opportunity of the visitor center to maybe find a really commanding position there right at the center of town. And then looking at some of the historic properties, one of the students took a look at how you take a big Plat of Zion block, 600 by 600, and how you better utilize the interior of those blocks. And then not to forget the idea of the land that's right out the back of the building here called the Plateau site. We think there's an amazing opportunity to create a park destination unparalleled in the city on that site. So the first thing that we talked about, we contacted Camille and some others, Kelly, and asked for a contact at UDOT, to discuss the idea of a state highway and how a local community needs to discuss with the state how the state highway or the street can better serve the local community. And so we talked with UDOT, and we want to make sure, and there is a caveat in this document, and Jake wants to make sure that I mention that UDOT needs to look at these things scientifically. They need to study the actual average daily trip numbers and what happens 365 days a year in order for us to draw some conclusions here. But what we wanted to look at conceptually was the opportunity to create a greater sense of pause as you enter downtown. So we looked at a roundabout solution and a T intersection solution. And we looked at the opportunity to actually take land that is currently not serving a purpose on this corner and make a development site out of it. And so the relationship of these elements establishes a whole new sense of centrality to the downtown. And it links also to the idea that Jake introduced of the necklace. So the necklace is this chain or this linkage to Kanab Creek and the linkage out to Coral Cliffs, and this whole new sense of a kind of a new, think of a wagon wheel and spokes back to the center. We need a strong center. We need these outer rings. And we also then fit into that greater outer ring, which is Zion and those national parks. And if we can create that set of connections, Kanab's going to be better positioned for the future. So if we go to that intersection, we look at Perry Lodge Hotel and the plaza. We are right now up here. The view to the Cave Mountain is in this direction. Now we look at the opportunity of taking from down here the notion of a consolidated visitor center, putting it on a corner where we right now have street right of way. So we're actually creating a new development site. Create gaps in that site so that the businesses behind can enjoy views through plazas and pedestrian ways and parking down here that you'll see in a subsequent diagram. But the idea of why not bring the visitor engagement right together right at the center of town. And so what it starts to look like in a little larger picture, again, we are here at Kanab Center now, is the opportunity to extend some additional retail down here with gaps in it, access to a consolidated parking lot, and the introduction of visitor center, maybe not-for-profit business or office space above that. Maybe there's a little, what the visitor to town wants is water, a food option, information, where to go, get oriented to the city. So that becomes a kind of new center. And that's a blow-up view of how this might all then better work and feed pedestrians into Main Street and around. And what some of that plaza space in back might look like. Again, people come to town being able to sit around water. Sorry. Jumping ahead. And have the kids get refreshed, get water, get reoriented, get to a restaurant, have a good lunch, and then head out for hopefully a trip or doing something in and around Kanab. And this kind of looks at what that might look like with office opportunities and things above, and then the actual functions of the Kanab Center and maybe a little food and beverage opportunity at the lower level. Shifting over to the plateau site, so I think most of you can orient that we're sitting right now in this space right here, and we got this lump of dirt back here called the plateau, and a parking lot and an opportunity to create a destination place for locals and for visitors that takes advantage of that existing topography, but creatively gives it some shape that's inspired by what draws everybody to this beautiful landscape, which is the topography of that landscape. And so instead of it, Jake and Carlos should be given great credit here. So one of the students was kind of floundering a little bit, and they said, well, instead of just finding an access up to a flat plate, why don't we make it an interesting trip along the way? And so these are a series of destinations from lowest to probably highest somewhere in here that ultimately link to all the surrounding functions and connect back, but they make a series of spaces rather than one big flat space on top. And so here you can sort of see there might even be a performance piece. So these are seating and stairs that focus around a sheltered area, so a covering over this. But you kind of meander through and create these lawn spaces, or these spaces that are framed by topography and xeriscape, or plants that operate under low water circumstances. So this gives you an idea from right out here at the back what that might look like to move up into that space. So this is where we are now, and then moving up to the performance space or the gathering space, and then to these lawn and different places. And as you get up, you basically get this 360-degree amazing view for even those who are just in town. You can really take advantage of those plateau views out over the city. And that shows how people might be able to gather there. So this is, as you can see, looking to the east. So we are right now down in this location. Taming the street involves reducing a lane and shrinking the lanes to 10.5, 11 feet. And then this would be the intersection with the new tourism center. So this is what takes the study. So UDOT and a consultant and the town would need to do the analysis of the trips, average daily trips, and how the intersections are performing at the peak hours in the morning and the afternoon, in order to investigate how to slow that traffic down a little bit and reduce the noise and the threat to the safety of people crossing, especially parents with their children and stuff, and tourists, and really make it more hospitable downtown. And that's kind of what the scale of that could look like coming into town. This has been done over and over across the country. We got involved in a little suburban setting in St. Louis, where the downtown had a state highway running through an old residential district, and the traffic levels were significant, but they didn't warrant 4 lanes and a turning lane and the speed of the traffic. So we went there, we went out and bought one of those decimal meters, and we went and got a speed gun, and we did our own evaluation of how the downtown was performing for the local businesses. And we took it to the planning commission and we said, let us shrink the lanes. We'll just do it with paint and jersey barriers temporarily. We won't change the engineering of the street or the flow lines. And we'll put out a survey so the public can comment. And we'll give it a month so they can get used to it. And we got the information back, and lo and behold, they said, yeah, we really don't need all that speed and stuff. And the businesses are experiencing an enhanced experience and higher sales levels. And so they decided to then reconfigure the street. The next aspect of this is Victor last night was joking about the name Kanab, but it's this idea that, and this is not to say that the school shouldn't necessarily just stay right where it is. I mean, I couldn't think of a better fate for that school, but in the event that it gets sent to Ranchos or some other site, there's an incredible opportunity to look at that site or even adjacent sites for local incubation of business, local gathering and community center activity. It's really to take that 25 to 45-year-old segment and say, we want you to come back downtown, we want you to gather, we want you to share ideas, we want you to incubate your businesses. So this particular solution looks at repurposing the school for community center purpose. And that's happening also in other places around the country. And it takes different forms of gathering around ice cream or coffee or food and beverage related stuff. And if we were to just look at what's available here, we've got Highway 89 and Main Street. So this is your festival street. Here's an opportunity with open ground that could be, even if you repurpose the school and enhance the grounds a little bit, allowing these functions to spill up and utilize that space. This just looks at a community retail and office component to this, taking away portions of the building and making the building less a large mass or lump and making it smaller building components, and then looking at future opportunities for housing and maybe a little park space, all of which could feed into that space and down into our sort of civic center and our revitalized core. This little plan that shows how these spaces could be developed as park and play spaces, and then the introduction of some additional residential. Now what some of that might start to look like. So stepping back, you can kind of see what that whole piece looks like, feeding into Main Street with an intersection that slows and an opportunity with the plateau site to really re-energize the core of the city. You kind of see how all these projects relate to one another. And reinforce some of the activities and designation of your festival streets, North and South Main Street. And then looking south of 89 into that more historic area, I don't know, the students really fell in love with the beautiful streets with the big, largely cottonwood trees, but some Chinese elms and stuff. And the kind of informality of that whole thing. And especially on First South, as it extends west and connects to that new park that we were talking about, just really finding even places to drop in some more cottonwoods to make the shade continuous, but keep it without sidewalks and keep it just cool Kanab, rural kind of feeling. That's what's really unique about this place, and I think what's really beautiful about it. And then one of the students looked into the very large blocks, and some of the blocks have a lack of something going on in the center, and that maybe there could be gardens for vegetables, gardens for community in the interiors of some of those blocks. So she just looked at that little precedent study to create a little public garden, public space for the community and for the neighborhood, and different precedents. People in Utah have been looking at those 600 by 600 foot blocks because obviously they were set up for residential on the outside and agriculture in the middle, because it was all how to sustain the neighborhood and the block in support of growing your own food. So really the core people are talking in specific terms about taking something that has a little sense of division, creating a new energy at the center so that energy radiates out and reconnects the downtown. I think it's really a great little study. This is what it represents in terms of quantities. Carlos.
I'm only going to be here 2 minutes, but the only thing that I would like to add before we get into how our students address the topic of housing is that we all three, Jake, Todd, and I, wish our students were here presenting this work to you, because I think they are very proud of what they did, and they put a lot of effort into it. So it is a bit of a shame that they are not here to dodge your questions after. For housing, the students looked at projections of population in trying to understand what are the future needs of housing, and what is the variety of housing, and how is this community changing and growing, and how they need to respond with opportunities for everybody. So we will be looking at 3 different parts of town that are somewhat representative of different types of housing provisions that are maybe needed in Kanab in the future, based on their analysis of projection, when we have a future population that is going to be in greater majority in the range where they're building families and looking for jobs and creating and growing and in need of housing opportunities that perhaps are not the current availability of housing in terms of size, or in terms of composition, or in terms of location and preferences. So they looked at a population that is probably going to be a little, we have a very slim proportion of people in middle working ages, and it's going to increase in the future. We also have projections and current needs of a lot of, based on income, housing opportunities for people in medium and low income, more than in the high income bracket. And based on that, the students started looking at how do we create something that offers not only opportunities for one specific group of people, but to a more diverse community where people have options for their preferences and their needs. So, and in the process of that, they developed sort of a concept that we call the housing transect, which is the range of variety of homes that should be available for different parts of town. So they say our set of options, or many of housing options, go from a higher density apartment complexes to very large lot housing, single family home dwellings, and in between there is a range of opportunities that go from townhomes to much more cluster type of housing arrangement for single families. So different parts of Kanab needs a different combination of these things, and that's where we're going to try to present this and that they also look into part of your input about what you consider where the culturally significant places and the recreational significant places were located, and where some of the historical locations are as well. And those help them determine where were the driving factors that could help us identify places that are suitable for housing, and then what type of housing should be implemented in there or proposed in there. So there's a lot of the community input here. And then 3 different parts of areas were identified. One, which is in the downtown area, where there is a specific type of opportunities for infill and for creating a little bit more denser, with a little bit more of an urban flavor type of development. We do have the ranchos, which has certain areas that are still buildable and have again another different type of housing style, and a place that is perhaps if not under pressure, is a desired place for future housing settlements that we also find that has very strong environmental value and a lot of open space opportunities. So how do we do something that address housing issues in this place without losing the possibilities of this place becoming something that is also contributing in the ecological and the recreational aspect of the whole community? So how do you mix then affordability with the need of diversity in housing without losing the identity of the town? And So here are some of the proposals. They selected the site in the historic district of the town south of 89, and they looked for places where infill could happen, and then how to treat that infill. The range goes from, for this particular place, goes into the higher density opportunity to maybe small lot housing opportunity. It doesn't go to the 1 acre or more acreage per house. And this is a little bit of a possibility of how to integrate 32 units into this available space in there without breaking down the historical character of the town and trying to make these connections to 89 and Main Street in order to accommodate and offer opportunities for people that perhaps are smaller families or with an affordability of housing that requires looking for a compact and more dense arrangements, or for a lifestyle that also is expressing these preferences. So different housing units can create different places for different needs. Look at everything is kind of closer together, and creating these complementary services for the lack of a very large, perhaps own backyard. But again, addressing some of the lifestyles that can be accommodated in this place. You can see a little bit of that and how they are showing the integration, which is historic, which more modern type of settlements, negotiated with some community gardens in there, blending in with the historic composition of the town. Here's some renderings of how this place is. Near to the ranches comes the other section that doesn't go into the apartment complex, but tries and tests the idea of, okay, is it possible to integrate in this area places that range from low density to a much more clustered arrangement of homes. And they look at the west side of the creek mostly and try to, very close to the creek, and try to develop a little bit into the west as well. You will see in the layout. And I think this is showing north to the left side, yes. So the west side of the creek is in the lower part of the image. And you can see how, you can see very faintly here that the existing ranchos houses, and then they were able to identify pods that could be interconnected and offer some sort of continuity to the drainage and the open space that will lead into the creek, but at the same time finding places to allocate homes that were moving in this range, where homes towards the edge of each one of these clusters will be low density houses that will help to negotiate and kind of shield and blend in with the existing ranchos development, whereas towards the center of the core you can see a little bit more dense arrangements of townhomes and smaller lots. You go across the creek and there's also the opportunity to expand that in close proximity to the school, which I think is right here. Here are some renderings from the students about how this place could take shape. And then at the south part of the area, we have opportunity to explore even a less dense and a little bit more direct access to open space type of arrangements, again, without interrupting the ecological functions of the place, and at the same time allowing people to have a much more direct experience of the outdoor space. So one of our students identified drainages, buffered these drainages, buffered some of the property of the, or some of the areas around the reservoir. You can see that is in this light green color as the buffer of these streams and the reservoir. And then increase that reservoir and establish a hierarchical system of roads that will allow us to locate some housing development, and created system of roads. Here are the secondary roads that will lead into the homes. And then you can see here in the combination of trail roads and open space that we still have the continuity of those creeks, and the open space allows us to maintain that ecological function of the place. And then creating opportunities for conservation by creating this small cluster. This is very diagrammatically, very conceptual, but the main idea here is that if we can create small clusters of homes, and the separation between clusters can vary, of course, but everybody living in these places will have a very direct access to open space, will have a very simple way of addressing the place, and will create a smaller impact in the place, both visually and physically. So here are some of the ideas of how this place could look. And together, these three different opportunities for developing areas will allow us to provide 960 homes. And by the type of development that we are proposing, or the students are proposing, some land will be preserved as open space. And by the way, this 960 housing units is probably the number of housing units that the city is going to be needing by 2060. So there is a very good amount of housing provision here for the next 40 years. And the development involves the use of 100 more acres of development. I think it's Todd's turn.
Are you guys still with us? Still following? You good? Is it interesting? I hope not too threatening. This one is, I'm going to just tell you a little story about the necklace idea. So when Jake first came, he was doing crits with the students, and he said, "What's this necklace stuff?" He said, "I don't think they'll understand it." And where the necklace comes from is there's a guy called Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted was his name, and he was the first landscape architect in the world, really. But he started out as he was just a farmer. He actually, his father owned some farms, and he helped better understand how soil and agricultural practices could better grow plants. And then he succeeded at a couple of those things, but he kept moving on to new things. So he became a journalist, and he went to the South, and he was investigating the impact of slavery on just the whole dynamics of slavery. And so he became a bit of an advocate for suffrage. And then he got conscripted into the Civil War, the Union Army, and he was a smart young man. He was in his 30s, and he was in charge of getting bodies and armaments and wounded in and out of the battle lines, and was significantly responsible for the success of the Union Army in the Civil War. He came back to New York, and he heard about this thing there was an idea brewing about Central Park. And Central Park at that time was just pasture and farmland. And so he entered the competition with an architect, and they won. And they created a vision that, has since become one of the most amazing public spaces and most celebrated public spaces on Earth, which is Central Park being way ahead of its time. So what Frederick Law Olmsted was good at was anticipating what the future need of a community would be. And he went up to Boston, and he went to a place called Back Bay, and he saw land that had been swampland and had been kind of like malaria infested, or it was breeding mosquitoes and undesirable populations. And he envisioned it as a park system that later became called the Emerald Necklace. And what it means to Boston today. It's where Fenway Park is for you baseball fans, and a bunch of different really key elements of Back Bay and the structure of open space for Boston. And so he really gave us the legacy of coming into communities and saying, what is going on today and what might your future be? And looking out a little bit further in the future. And the students got really excited about the east end of the east entry to Kanab. And so when Jake introduced the idea of the necklace, it was really to take all 4 or 5 of these ideas and connect them up to the benefit of all the citizens of Kanab. But that eastern edge includes Pugh Canyon, it includes Highway 89, the eastern branch coming into town. It includes the original reason for starting this whole project was a group of people who are in the audience today, and Matt invited me down, or I was coming down. They said, let's meet and talk about what this charrette could be. And he talked about something about a golf course that was no longer a golf course and the repurposing of that. And then there were some residents that were on the golf course that wanted to see a vision for the repurposing of the golf course. And then there was a woman who was connected to the Pugh Canyon land and who was actually at the time in Florida visiting her father, and so I didn't get a chance to meet Yulia, but I got introduced to the idea that the golf course and the canyon might be kind of connected. And then along down the way there was a piece of property up against the highway called the Johnson property, I guess, and there was an idea that that might serve, if we could create a vision and tie those 3 things together, we might be able to create a whole new kind of entry experience. And in the spirit, the reason for going through the whole homestead conversation was to say, if we can connect the 3 ideas of those 3 places, we can have a really beautiful, publicly accessible, and revenue returning solution for the entire eastern end of Kanab, all the way up into the public lands and the bluffs. So this is our pass at that. So these are the basic components, the 89 component, the entrance to town, the existing, this is kind of what we want to avoid, just one thing after another thing after another thing entering town. And so there's an opportunity here to really bring the presence of Pugh Canyon back into the community and resolve the fate of the golf course area. And so these are really the ownership components of it. And again, it's really connected to that surrounding public land. So it allows us to really make really drag the value of the public land to the center of town, if you will. And we want to do that for all the people of the community, visitors, locals, and maybe even have an educational component for hospitality or culinary included in the whole idea, so that it relates also to the visitor. The strongest thing going for us is that scenery, and so we all share that scenery as townspeople, so why not protect the area between town and the scenery so that we don't have a visual block to that. And this is kind of really what's at stake. This is why we're all, as a visitor, blown away by coming here, and we just jaws drop. Carlos had been helping us, but he was ill when the students came down, so this is his first visit in 5-10 years he hadn't been down here, and it was just like driving in yesterday was just like the poem that it always, you guys need to be shaken to say, do you realize what a beautiful place you have? So these are the elements that are at stake at the whole eastern end of your community. And we start with the former golf course and look at the residential current and proposed, and we look at how what used to be golf holes can be a meaningful open space system that links all this stuff together. So we define the area as having an active portion, which is coming off of 89 past the gas station, looking at the existing fountain, looking at a circuit of that that's really more, even though this is kind of an active part, but more passive element here, passing between existing and proposed residential, and then a series of spaces that are connected off the existing clubhouse and parking lot on up, and then this upper bench part looking back out over the city, kind of it was described this morning as a verge, I think, from someone that didn't grow up speaking English but has pretty good command of the language. And then this piece that when we come around looks back out over the whole valley that could be the culinary kind of gathering center, a growing place for food and culinary and hospitality learning, or also could be considered as a kind of artists in residence, or kind of a learning center for local skill sets necessary to enhance the service of the community. So from an illustrative point of view, we have this lower piece, so you come in looking at a park, there's a kind of lower area and water feature. We take and divert water from the existing system and create a kind of an active, walkable area for families, kind of an oasis that moves up through a series of drier spaces into an upper lawn and kind of play area. There could be court spaces off of that. This link behind the existing and proposed residential is primarily a series of walking trails and seating areas, and then extending up to this upper lawn that again overlooks the whole valley and connecting back into the loop, and then down into the little artist campus, culinary school, and maybe like a little 4-H center or a place where kids could come and learn some of these skill sets. So a kind of a lifelong learning opportunity out here at the base of Pugh Canyon. We're also looking at how all this stuff links up. So in discussions with Matt and Yulia and others, trying to find ways in which this whole system can link through and not overwhelm the existing residents. So the whole idea here is we don't want this to be so active that it negatively impacts them. This is a kind of a neighborhood park with more of a couple of activity centers that are away from impact of the existing neighborhood, if that makes sense. So this piece has playground and family-oriented stuff connected to clubhouse, and then the courts and the upper lawn and the circuit. And then the connection up across the road to a kind of lawn at the base of the cliffs. This would be pretty exotic, kind of like if any of you've been to Angel's Landing, kind of that sort of feeling. And then connecting out to the gateway up into Pugh Canyon, which you get to in a minute. And then the campus piece is another water piece connected back with little cabins or residences for people that come and stay and learn. And so this could, this is again, the idea is to give you some ideas and opportunities for you to figure out what the program for that is. But the great opportunity here to look back out over the valley and then the Johnson property down here. So this whole thing coalesces an identity for the eastern end of your community. And that's what some of those water pieces might look like. But the juxtaposition of that water gathering place for the community and the cliffs and the lower play and active zone with a little ice cream shop or coffee shop down there. Pretty amazing. This is an idea that has worked for the last 40 or 50 years in different parts of the country. It involves taking a landscape and keeping it scenic by creating a few opportunities that people pay, say, a high dollar for, to preserve the scenery for local residents and also for the people that purchase that opportunity. It's called a conservation easement. And the intent is to identify in Pugh Canyon, I'm going to fast forward to the conservation easement idea. So this is the parks and the head of the canyon that we just described. So you actually find very specific places that are somewhat hidden. You create 20 or so opportunities and you sell the sites for enough money that you can afford to service the sites provide some compensation for the owner of the greater scenery and keep the entire canyon, which is about this big, and the public access up into that canyon from being uniformly stamped with houses. So it allows this whole eastern end to remain relatively open. And that's kind of what that looks like. I apologize for going forward. I'm going to go back and catch up a little bit. So these are the areas that we're talking about. What I just described as the conservation easement up here, an area that we call Two Moons and Sapala Village. So we're going to look at some details of different residential, and this is the one that's really carrying the freight for the conservation easement. But the general notion is to take what maybe developers might want to do if left to their own devices and be more, creating stronger relationships with topography and views and the features of the land. And that's the conservation easement piece. This is what some of those individual sites might look like. And then this is Two Moons area. And again, saving a fair amount of that desert space, understanding the local topography in a way that maximizes the views for these individual homeowners. This would be a free market, so not part of the conservation easement. And then another Sapala Village, another aspect of that, and what that would look like. The last piece on this is the Johnson piece, and the idea here was to really see this as an opportunity to develop something that would be a gateway. It could be a restaurant or food and beverage opportunity. It could celebrate different breeds of cattle and utilize the surrounding pasture. So you can imagine that this is the piece all up here that is the pasture that supports a limited herd, and maybe the branded meat of that herd is featured in a restaurant, and maybe there is a little museum piece or even a gift shop connected with that. Maybe there's a place for barn dances or square dances or bluegrass concerts that can spill out into that pasture and the overflow parking necessary for that. And maybe that little collection of things might be something really cool to drive by in concert with saving the canyon and the refurbishing of the golf course. Sometimes professors don't get everything they wish for. And one of the students they looked at the Blue Sage building down on Main Street and they said, isn't it interesting how some of the architecture gets imported from Europe all the way to places like Kanab? And so the student put this is a French mansard roof. Carlos and I had a little trouble with that, but we couldn't persuade the student to change it. And they might ultimately watch this Facebook, so I have to be careful about what I'm saying. But, that's what that might look like. So this is the necklace. All the trails come from Jackson, linking these residential developments up through all the interlinking of the existing golf course up into the canyon and all into that BLM space, and then linking back and ultimately the Plateau Park. So now in this particular diagram, you can see how all this stuff can provide amazing variety and different opportunities to experience the town. 745 new trees, that's an interesting statistic. Nearly 500 acres of open space, 148 residential opportunities, and 6.5 miles of trails. That's it for me. Jake's going to take us home on the reservoir.
One thing I learned from working in Kanab, there's two dangerous things, and it's a person who lives in Kanab with an idea. I've seen some pretty amazing things happen in a very short amount of time when somebody in this town had an idea and was excited about it. One of those things that I've seen explode in my time here was the effort at the Reservoir. If you would have told anybody in this town 20 years ago that there'd be a recreational mentally out there, I think that people would have been pretty surprised. So it's exciting to see how that's developed, and also some of the students' ideas. They really got excited about the opportunities at the Reservoir. If any of you have been to the Reservoir and looked back at the cliffs and the community, it's a pretty amazing place to be. So our students really latched onto that. So I want to run through this. Again, that's where it's at in this overall arching idea of the necklace that connects these things to the community. Another war cry that has been part of this from day one, both from the community and the students, was the idea that we're going to build these things for the community first. This is for people in Kanab, and if people come to visit, that's great. And I think that's been a governing idea, is what's best for Kanab. And if it's good for Kanab, it's going to be good for those who come to visit. And I think the Reservoir is a prime example of that. So again, not a lot of water around here. You're all very familiar with that. This is a very special place. It's a special place for people, but it's also a very special place for wildlife. It's an ecological hotspot. And any of you that have spent time out there have watched the different animals and the birds that come and move through this country and use Jackson Flat as a stopping point. So our students looked at that and said, where are the places where let's start to think about the birds first. And so they mapped out where prime nesting and important habitat areas, and then put a buffer around that and said, where do these animals and birds, where are they impacted? At what distance would we not want to get close to them and impede their life cycles? And so they mapped that out. And that really became the framework that said, these are the areas we don't want to touch. And then they looked at further, what are other constraints? What are the things we should take off the table when it comes to developing this area? And that left them with a couple of development zones. And so you'll see over and over again, this becomes a framework for where they put certain things as an idea for Jackson Flat Reservoir. So this is the master plan, and I'll go through each of these sites. There's an area here, 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 and these two areas here. So we'll talk about each of those individually. So the first area is the beach. Any of you that have been out there, that's been really the source of a lot of the development lately, has been focused on the beach area. And so the students took some time to think about what are some additional amenities that could go there at the beach area and how might that look. So this is kind of an idea of what it might look like if they implemented a couple other things. Again, that view back to the community from this area would be pretty spectacular. Looking at the conservation garden, this idea that the Water Conservancy District might want to have a space that showcases ways to approach a water-wise landscape and showcases some plants and things that are both water sensitive as well as beautiful. So branching off of the existing offices, some ideas, restroom facilities, clubhouse, an amphitheater, a place to gather, a more active space that's attached to the offices out there. Again, this is another idea of what it would look like to look back onto the community from this area. One of the other things that's happened significantly in the last 5 to 10 years in Kanab is the importance in the development of trails. And that's something that, as Kelly mentioned, I was fortunate enough in a different career to be part of some of that here in this area. And moving forward, have an opportunity to integrate some of the ideas of the students into a trails plan over the summer. But one of the trails that's been happening is a connection from town to the reservoir. And that connection comes down sort of here. And so the idea of the students was to provide an endpoint or a terminus where people could park on one end and use that trail and either head from the reservoir to the community or to the community and to the reservoir, but provide a place for people to park. So you can see it's dispersed. It's not a monolithic area. The idea is to have it lay lightly on the land. Another idea that has been talked about, and another amazing asset that I think is easy to take for granted, is the amazing night sky that you have here. So the idea is, could you put some sort of opportunity where people could observe the night sky? And one of the ideas was to put it out in this area. And I know that site has been moving around and has the ideas and the commitments towards that have advanced even in the time that the students have been working on this. But they put this up as an idea and put that into the idea of a site plan, as well as some ideas of what that might look like to have an observatory out at Jackson Flat. One of the students had an idea to incorporate a fishing pier or some sort of kayak area where people could a small non-motorized marina where people could go across the lake and be able to park, look out, and look back again at the community. So the final area was the addition of camping. This area is currently used day use only, and so the idea was, could they augment or create some more diversity in the camping experience in Jackson Flat. So they looked at envisioning some sort of camping opportunity where people could pitch tents. This is not an RV park. It's a more simplified, more primitive version, an opportunity for people to get out and spend some more long-term time at Jackson Flat Reservoir. So all in all, it creates about 30 different campsites, another quarter mile of interpretive trails that builds on the assets that are already happening in Jackson Flat. And again, it's that idea that start with the people and what people of Kanab could really enjoy, and then if people come and also get a benefit from it, that's an addition. This is you, Todd. So, as we've talked about, the entire purpose and what we pushed our students to really look at is how do you bring all these elements together? And when we look at all these elements that we've talked about today, some of them are very far-reaching. Some of them are very progressive, and as I mentioned, some of them might be borderline scary. But the community is changing, and in ways that are exciting and in ways that are challenging as well. I think that this current situation that we all find ourselves in will change the future of Kanab. I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, it'd be as foggy as everybody else's. But this is a special place to live, it's a special place to work, and people that are in communities that are being heavily impacted are starting to look at communities like Kanab, at gateway communities across the West, as a refuge from the challenges that they may be experiencing. And I think, so some of these ideas that seem really 20, 40, 50 years in the future may happen more rapidly from what we've seen in the last 2 months. People maybe starting to think of a getaway in different ways. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity. We as designers and planners, we thrive on the idea of how do you make the best out of any situation? How do we take an opportunity or a constraint and we make the best out of it? And I think that this is hopefully an opportunity to look at these amenities, which are exciting, and how do you link them together? That's been one of the challenges, I think, for all the students, is bringing all these ideas into a whole, and that's been the idea of the necklace as a defining feature that would allow these amazing opportunities to be connected, integrated, and an asset to your community. Do you want to talk about the core? Todd will walk us through the...
Yeah, so through a course of working with you all and through the eyes of the professors, and the eyes of the locals, and the eyes of the people that invited us to do this, the sum total of that is that collection of projects. And it was tough getting through the COVID thing, and you guys really hung in there through all of this. And Kelly was doing lobbying in Salt Lake City and running up to the charrette, and Dirk was there on multiple occasions, and various members of this audience were there at the public outreach. So it really is the best experience that we've ever had. And Carlos and I were talking about, yeah, have to put a caveat in here that these are people who've been doing this for 3.5 years. They've been learning something that takes a lifetime to learn, to how to see how a community comes together and how it can better serve its populations, its visitors, and its local residents. And speaking from 45 years or so of experience, I hate to say, but you know, it's the most fascinating profession that I can imagine, and we're not always right, but we have a good time trying to figure out a better outcome for communities and the people that live there. And so we want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to be here, and for the students to learn, and hopefully for you guys to benefit. So we have about a 150-page document, and it includes a compilation of all this stuff, been edited by the university staff and been through our hands a few times. And we just hope that you will form thought-leading groups for those things that you decide you want to pursue and that are good ideas to try to implement, that you carry this on. I know Matt and Kelly and others are interested in doing that. So thank you all. We want to take questions if you've got questions.
She'll just hold the microphone, so.
Okay, I just wanted to, any of these projects, is there one that's been selected to be the first one?
Good question.
Any discussion around that?
If it were me, I would address Main Street. That would be my kind of professional advice. But I think any of these are, there's about a dozen really good ideas in here that I think if you went out to a consulting firm to do this, that would cost considerable amount of money to get these dozen ideas teed up for you. So my professional advice is anything that you want to move forward with of these dozen or so ideas is a good idea. But I think the thing that's most fundamental to the success of the future, and will take some public interaction and discussion as well as UDOT involvement, is addressing Main Street. I think that is the most fundamental thing, personally. But I don't know if my colleagues agree.
I would advocate for trails, but that's just my selfish opinion.
Yeah, Tim.
Housing is obviously a hot potato as well. I mean, local officials have tried to address the vacation rentals situation to the extent of kind of, as myself and other people I know, feeling a little bit targeted. They're local businesses that should be encouraged, but there are other solutions, obviously, that you guys have identified to create a variety of new housing in different places that we've never even thought of. So, you know, are there funding avenues for that, for different ways of looking ahead to a variety of housing types in some interesting landscapes, which are really inspiring stuff.
Yeah, there's, it's interesting that, this is kind of an esoteric point, but a lot of places that are besieged by tourist impact, some of them are famous places that you don't want to be anything like, but they addressed these issues early on because the challenge of affordability became such a huge hurdle. And these places are places like Moab, Park City, Aspen. And it's because when you introduce economies from the outside world into the real estate market and the influence of Airbnb, all of which is, you know, it's just a reality. It's a free market economy. But you end up messing up the opportunity for people's kids to stay in the home in the town that they grew up in. And I dealt with this in Bellingham, Washington, which has Western Washington State University, and there were no jobs for those kids that allowed them to afford the houses because everybody from Seattle was up there porting their
sailboats in Bellingham. And it was really sad to have townspeople say, you know, my kids can't live in the town they grew up with. They can't live in the town that they went to school at, to university at, because there are no jobs in that town of any significance that would keep them there. So these are problems that exist all over the place, and unless communities start talking about them, they're just gonna, you know, it gets to the point where you need government intervention, right, at a significant level. You need to demand that every developer that comes into town builds affordable units. That's what's on the horizon. So, good question, Tim. Yes.
Thank you for the study. Can you all hear? Thank you for the study. I think there's wonderful ideas in there. How critical do you think that for the energy and the vibe of the downtown area that you're proposing there is the school location?
I don't think it's absolutely essential. I think the most important thing is to make the downtown a walkable place, shaded and free from extreme impact of the car. Then the more opportunities you can create for community reasons for them to go down there, which the repurposing of the school would provide multiple opportunities for different age groups to want to be downtown. But it also requires an operational and administrative commitment on the part of the city. And I think the school's just fine there. I think the worst thing you could do is tear everything down and just make it a private use of some sort. So I don't want to jump into, I learned a long time ago that when you jump into fights on things and have opinions that aren't substantiated, like, well, the school should leave and we should do what we said, my first instinct was, why can't the school stay there? But then through further conversations with community members, they said, well, it might want to go to the ranchos. And I thought, that might not be a bad idea. I think they're both good ideas. So you leave it to you guys to figure out where you want it, and then the things that you build around it. I think Matt's actually actively refurbishing some office space on Main Street. So there's already energy going there. You want to bring new energy where there's existing energy. Because when you do those two things together, then people go, wow, that whole part of town is coming together, right? And it just starts to create momentum. Good question.
Hey, Todd. Can I just add to that? Yeah. I think it's important, and one thing we explored with the students is the idea that school was put there for a reason. Historically, it became the heart. It was part of the heart of the community. That's why it's on that really important, or near that really important corner. So structurally within the town, it has relevance, and if it does go away, then something else structurally that has relevance needs to fill that void. I think kind of with what
community relevance.
Community relevance.
Yeah, I like that.
Where we start to bleed the heart of the community out to the edges, and you have that same situation that's happened in countless small towns across the United States, where the power and the energy of the town bleeds to the outside, and the core is left sort of empty. And then we all sort of lament that downtown died, but we let the energy bleed out. So it's just an energetic place that needs some sort of relevance there. That's the point of it.
Victor.
I have a question about the traffic, because I sat in on almost every one of Roger Brooks's meetings over however long he was here, and he said the same thing that you're saying. But it doesn't seem UDOT just kind of, I don't know how do we connect with UDOT and convince them, yes, trucks, business has to be done, but is there a bypass or something like that? Because having those BT trucks run through there, and it's my business, people don't want to sit on the sidewalk, because number one, the trucks are speeding, number two, there are a lot of them, number three, they're loud. I don't see how that enhances this town in any way in the long haul, because there's just going to be more and more traffic. But how do you manage that traffic? Is a bypass kill the town, like some people worry about? It's trucks only? Because having 18-wheelers roaring through town is just not, and forget tourism. I mean, it's just like, it's annoying. And one of the city council members stood up and said, well, there you were, when I was a kid, it doesn't bother me. If you sit out there, like you witnessed last night, it's annoying. And
Yeah.
it's not good for the town in any way, so in other towns, how do you work with the transportation authorities and convince them, okay, you guys are just moving, we begged for crosswalks. No, it didn't happen. Whoops. When we had a chance, and now, so how do you work with them in other places, and how do you come to an agreement?
Well, like the example in Missouri, in the St. Louis area, was we just sat down with them and said, this is what the community wants, and we wouldn't let them leave, right? So the community had patience, and the MDOT, Missouri Department of Transportation, it takes a while, because I've been doing this a long time. I've got white hair. And so there's a place in Denver called Larimer Square that used to be a state highway. And Larimer Square is one of the preserved historic little set of buildings, just gorgeous. And we said, you know, it just doesn't work to have these little businesses in this cafe environment. There used to be a really good deli cafe there called The Market. It just doesn't work to have those cars going 35, 45 miles an hour through there and splashing people, you know, when it rained and snowed and stuff. And we just had to sit down and we had to look at the whole system, whether it's a bypass or not. And we had to say, our primary purpose is to reduce speed, to promote safety, to take the decibel level down, and whatever it takes, we're gonna get to the best solution, the best compromise. And it may involve bypass, it may involve some traffic lights, it may involve shrinking lanes. But walking out there at 10:30 last night and seeing people accelerate through town, and obviously there's not many people out there then, but there have been some horrendous accidents in the downtown. And that, you know, the other thing that is like amazing about that T intersection is you get a free development parcel for Camille to put the visitor center, right, Camille?
You guys were having me dreaming for a while. I was like picturing a big theater where we have video showing. And
Exactly.
really can centers can
Transparent,
come
yeah.
out and space and,
Yeah, awesome.
so yeah, it was kind of lit me up.
So, I know, Victor, I wish I could bypass all those trucks too, because I noticed that as I was munching on that salad last night. The noise of those big trucks is, but it's also just a speed question. When you get knobby tires and you get over 35 miles an hour, the decibel level just goes like that. And then I showed you those parklets that, there's a way that you can take parking stalls in the summer when there's primarily tourist activity out there. You can create little areas for people to sit out at the edge, and that screens the sidewalk. So there are a number of solutions that can help improve it.
Can I add to that as well?
Yeah.
So from speaking with UDOT, UDOT is changing. I will say that they are becoming more community focused as an initiative. And so I think if your concerns fell on deaf ears several years ago, those ears may have changed, I guess is one ray of hope. The planner here in this region is really interested in having conversations. The danger is the students provided one vision of many. A bypass is one solution. Parklets are one. There are many, many solutions, and I think it needs to come down to what their requirements are, because UDOT has many, many standards, national standards and state standards that they're required to uphold that are sort of written in stone that they are responsible for. There are many things that are not written in stone, and those are things that the community can say, here are our needs and here are your needs. Where is the middle ground that meets both of those needs? I think the missing link a lot of times is they don't know that there is a community need out there, or perhaps their way of going about things historically was not as key on listening. But I think that's changing. So I would say approaching with that idea of we want to do what's best for our community. We want a thought partner and an engineering partner in this could be a opportunity to engage them again. But engaging them with sort of a stick and beating home a single idea amongst many that could also fit that need will probably raise more defensive walls and build more bridges.
Yeah.
We have the Portland perspective, right?
Actually, my question's for you, Camille, because we met with you a while ago, a year ago maybe. So, and some of this conversation, we had some of this conversation. I don't know where they're at with that, because they were looking at a multitude of things, not only a bypass, but slowing things down, reducing lanes, whatever that, and crosswalks, because that was a big issue, because unfortunately someone had just gotten killed. So I don't know, have you heard anything? Or have we-
Yeah, I got an email just this week. I'm loud enough, I don't need it. Nope. I got an email just this week. So the city and county had hired civil science to do the study, but because of COVID, obviously it made it really difficult to study. And also one of the things they were going to consider is how activities at this Kanab Center impacted traffic patterns and pedestrian patterns. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we had our conferences canceled, and so they haven't had that chance to observe that yet. So they're trying to get that underway, and that will be considered.
Camille provided us with contact information, so we had both a consulting contact and a UDOT contact, and we started having conversations, and then Jake had a separate conversation, and UDOT was saying, hey, Utah State, you go out and work with these communities, and then the communities come back and insist on these things happening, and it's causing us some embarrassment. So Jake and I cooked up a caveat here that said, these are all things that we've talked to UDOT about, but they need to be validated with the backup information. And that's so credit to Camille for making that link to us, for us. But I think in the spirit of Victor's question, you need to be, in my experience, persistent. And what's happened, to Jake's point, is the dots all around the country, the departments of transportation, have had to be sympathetic because they are ultimately in service to health, safety, and welfare, but also the wishes of the communities, right? They're in service to us. And that in the 50s, when engineering was totally command and control, that wasn't the case. Communities just said, we got to take whatever the dot tells us we have to do. And then it started to shift when the whole idea that downtowns can and should be walkable started to gain momentum across the country. People said, well, we got to go to the dots to resolve this question. So a lot of progress has been made. You have to be persistent, though. Tim?
Can I just throw in it's a quick comment, really. One thing really came across to me was the students, with your guidance, recognize the interaction between the community and the landscape around us. In lots of different ways. The reservoir is obviously part of that. Trails are part of that. We know why we love to live here, right? It's a special place. But revitalizing the creek, which is kind of a forgotten asset. When you're on the corner by Wonderstone, by the bakery, if you happen to look down, it's like a sheer drop. I don't know, it's 100 feet or more. You can't even get there. And that corridor of Kanab Creek, very interesting idea.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was sitting there last night at 10:30 watching videos on how to tie a pheasant tail fly and listening to a bird down in the bottom of that at Stewart Park because I want to get a sense of it at night. But Jake in particular worked at great length with students to find access points down into the park, and Matt took photographs of all of it, and I kept browbeating the students to find access points to the west. And since I gave you the little Olmsted story, the real story is that west of the creek will at some point be residential. We know that. If civilization continues to grow in Kanab, which I believe, I'm a bullish on Kanab person. I think people, in the spirit of Jake's summary, I think people post-COVID are going to find some of these more interesting remote places, as many of you have
We got refugees from New York, we got refugees from Great Britain, we got refugees from Vienna, all over the place here, Minnesota. And it's a beautiful place. So, I think that those parks are a jewel. And I think I had the opportunity, west of Denver, there's a canal system that used to bring water from the mountains and fed all of the agriculture in Denver and Aurora. And there's a community college sitting on an old vestige of the canal. And it was just like 2 piles of dirt a half a mile long that had been piled up with some big cottonwood trees on it. And I walked out there with the architect and I said, it would cost you about $3 million to make those trees and make that old canal. Let's build the campus around the canal. And as a community college, and those people they felt like they got millions of dollars of an amenity free, these big old trees, and we put those buildings right up on the canal. And to this day, they just love it. And I said to the students, to create that amenity of that river bottom costs millions of dollars. And when development jumps across to the west, now you got double the population that's going to utilize it. So, and Jake found access points.
It's steep. I will say though, the Kanab Creek of today is not the Kanab Creek of 50 or 100 or 150 years ago. That creek is dynamic and changing, and it is changing. Its trajectory has been negative for many decades, but that doesn't mean it will continue that way. There's been restoration efforts down there, and as those restoration efforts continue, that creek can come back. Maybe not in elevation per se, but in ecological function. And I think there is a lot of really great bones down there. You still have old cottonwood galleries. Many western rivers have lost those a long time ago, and getting those back is very, very challenging. Well, you don't get back a 50-year or 100-year-old cottonwood tree. You have some of those left, they just are hidden. And the students saw that, I think, and hopefully, opening the eyes of the community to that asset was one big challenge, or a big opportunity. And it is fun to have, maybe, to have your community seen through the eyes of outsiders and then document. And I'm sure people see your community every single day as outsiders, but don't get to tell you very much about it. Hopefully this gives you an insight into what people see that aren't from here, that our students, most of them really want to come back. They had ice cream on near the fire pits in January. Can I speak just wax poetic about quote Kanab for just a second? So I joke around, my grandparents eloped to Kanab to get married in 1940 something. And my grandfather was a basketball coach here in 1950 something, 51 or something. He started his educational career here in Kanab. So it kind of is a special place for me. It's a special place for my family. But there's something authentic here. And when I work with gateway communities all around the West, they've sold their authenticity down the river. And I say that in a very blunt way. There's still the nuggets and the special and the human aspect that makes people want to come here. That, the idea of how do we get people to stay an extra night? How do we get people to enjoy this place in the same way we see it? There's a genuine, the only word I can think of is authenticity in this town that's still here, that draws people from all around the world to come here and stay here. That the students could feel that. They felt it on Main Street eating ice cream near a fire pit. They felt it as they looked at the town and the houses and the cottonwood trees and looked at the way the wildlife moves in the sunset. Those things are things that you can't, for any price, you can't recreate those. If you try, you Disneyland-ify your community, and you haven't done that. And there's something special here that I think the community, that the students felt, and the more we talked about it, they recognized, and I hope that comes out in some of these ideas in the document that they've presented to you is that cry for preserving what's special still here.
That's probably good, huh? Matt, good?
That's a tough nut to follow.
Thanks for all your questions.
I'm just going to wrap it up and then send us on our way here, but I just want to say a couple things really quick that you maybe don't even really understand or appreciate what went on in this whole thing. It was 1 year ago I placed a call to Todd, and I would have never imagined that when I made that call we would end up with this. I never would have thought that was going to happen. I was just doing it because I said I know this guy and I'll make a call. And now here we are a year later. But what I would just say is real quick is that to be able to be up there at Utah State and to be involved in all these things is amazing, the amount of energy that was put into this. As we would be up there and Kelly and I would, I mean, if you ever have a chance to go up and see their department, it is impressive. The rooms, the setup, just the whole way it was, and to go up there and it's, 10 o'clock at night and there's just all these students in there working on all this. And the walls, I wish I could show you all the pictures I took of just the walls are covered and the tables are covered with everything about Kanab. And there's, just poking around every single little corner and everything. And then you go in there another day and there's people there. One day we were there and there was an uncle of Jamie Little. If, those of you that know Jamie Little, Mike Little's wife, and he's a very well-known landscape architect. And he was there, but he had to leave the next day because him and his team were heading to Saudi Arabia to spend time advising the Saudi Arabian government on landscape architecture type things. And he was involved, and there was alumni people involved. And there's a huge effort in this. And so I guess what I would say is I would hope that we can take some of these things, and maybe there's something that one of you heard something about this, say, man, I love that idea. Well, then take it, run it with it, get passionate about it. I think it was 6 years ago, right, Dirk, that Ken Gotzenberg went to the school board with this crazy idea to create a convention center right here, right? And I remember when Dirk came to me and he says, I want you to kind of take care of that. I said, are you kidding me? I'm not going to do that. And he said, no, Matt, I really want you to work on this. I said, well, okay, I'll do it for you, Dirk. And now we're standing here in this place. And so I guess my point is, these are concepts, but everything always starts as an idea, and somebody gets passionate about it, or somebody makes a commitment to go do it. And I think we don't wait around to get permission from somebody to get excited about something. And just take it and run with it and get other people excited. I'm hoping that that's what will happen. So this is all being videoed. I'm so appreciative of Mark Cunell. You know guys, how many of you know Mark, really know Mark? Well, if you don't really know Mark, you got to get to know Mark. I mean, what a jewel to have this guy retire here to Kanab. I mean, what a blessing to Kanab High School and our community. And those of you that got to see the graduation things that he did, it was just amazing to make that available online and everything. And so the basketball games and so forth. So this is all going to be online, and we'll send links to you. And what you need to do is you need to send it to your friends and your other people in town and say, watch it. We're going to index it so that if you say you need to listen to this one part, but it's about an hour and 20 minutes into it, we'll have a little guide thing that says, okay, here's where they talk about this. So you could scrub forward to like an hour and 10 minutes and listen to that, or whatever you want to do, we'll do that. Plus this will be on here. And if you want to, there's no copyright on this, right? Is there any copyright on this?
I don't believe.
Kanab City, is there any copyright on this? Those who have funded it? I guess what I want to say is use it,
Oh, yeah.
If you've got your group that you want to do it, I mean, print it. Use it and take it from there and run with it. So just really appreciate all those who have been involved, and just look for those emails, and let's just keep this talk going and make some of these dreams come true and make Kanab an even greater place to live than it already is, because it is an awesome place to live. Thank you.